Politics Memphis. That's right, Funky Politics Memphis, where you can catch us on all of our streaming platforms, whether it is Facebook, IG, or Twitter. Make sure you always like, subscribe, and follow. We'd love that right here on Funky Politics Memphis. As a matter of fact, this show is so funky. Oh my God, it's so funky. I've got some really hot guests in with us today. It's a little warm in the studio, so I've kind of, but anyway, this show is one of those things where we talk about everything, folks. We're going to talk local politics. We talk state. We talk national. We do it all, but we try to make it very substantive for our guests and also for our listeners out there, because it's important that we do what? We talk about it's our narrative, our way, our news right here in Memphis and Shelby County, Tennessee. You know what? You can also catch Funky Politics Memphis on WYXR on Thursdays at 9 a.m. That's right, folks. I'm in your car. I'm in your house, wherever you on your laptop, your iPod, just pop us on and you'll check us out right there on Funky Politics Memphis on WYXR. Oh my God, what is going on? So you know what? Today in our studio, we've got the one and only Dr. Altha Stewart, who happens to be the Associate Dean at the University of Tennessee of Community Health Engagement. We have not only her, but we've got Shelby County Juvenile Court Judge Tarik Sugarmon, and we also have the DA, that's right, Shelby County District Attorney, Steve Mulroy. And you know what, folks, we're going to have one hell of a show because we're talking about saving lives today. When I talk about saving lives, we're talking about our youth. We're talking about the state of our youth here in our community, right? And so there's nothing more important that we can focus on right now than on how do we make sure that we get those folks to the next level. Because guess what? They're the next leaders. They are absolutely the next leaders of whatever it is this city's going to look like, whatever this community is going to look like. We got to make sure our folks are strong and they are ready to take on the challenges of tomorrow. Well, you know what? Before we get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what happened. Oh God, this is my time when I talk about what happened the week before. Well, I want to make sure that we send we send timber up for the family of Officer Jeffrey Redd. This young man lost his life, and by the time you guys hear the show, which will be today, his funeral would have been held. He had 15 years of service to the city of Memphis and Shelby County. He also spent some time in the Marines serving our country. And he was a father, he was a son, he was loved, he was a family man. And most of all, he really loved people and he did his job and he did his job effectively. We're going to miss him, but we want to make sure his family knows that the citizens of Memphis and Memphis, Tennessee, really, really appreciate the service he rendered us, and Godspeed, and may he rest well. All right. Speaking of that, also, oh my God, I was talking about this in one of our meetings, and I'm telling you something right now. We've got a issue in our community, and we're going to talk about this today with our youth. We've got a young man out there. I'm hoping we talk about mentoring, we talk about the village, we talk about the community, but we also have got to talk about parents and parenting. There's some of us who have done a pretty good job of parenting, and there's some of us who lack some of the skills to actually be an effective parent. And I believe right now we've got a young man out there who's about 11 years old who's facing quite a bit of challenges in his life. I need our mentors to step up. Those folks who are in churches, the fraternities, the sororities, 100 Black men, 100 anybody, the National Council of Negro Women. We need everybody, all hands on deck, folks. All hands on deck. It's getting pretty bad out there. If it's not us, then it's going to be who? And we want to make sure that this young man, I don't know if he'll ever do something again, but I want to make sure that the next thing, if he does something that's not right, it's not the end of him, right? And that's what I think we have to be cognizant of as citizens in Memphis and Shelby County. We need to make sure that we reach out to our young people and we touch their lives. It's not just, if you don't do it through church, do it through community organizations, civic organizations, any way you can. Volunteer. We need more mentors out there. Oh God, another thing. Oh man, Memphis, we are getting ready to go to the big dance. That's right, folks. The Memphis Tigers. The men's and women's basketball team, they are doing a phenomenal job. A phenomenal job. The Tigers, we got one more huge game. Houston. Lord, I'm praying all over. We're going to do this thing. We're going to beat those guys, and guess what? We're going to go to the AAC tournament. We're going to win that thing, and then we're going to go to the big dance. This is our year, folks. We are going to win the championship. That's right. And also, you know what else we got? Our women at the University of Memphis are doing a phenomenal job. They are headed to the big dance as well. So guess what? We're going to have two teams. So guess what? You can root on this side, come back, root on the other side as well. So that's what we're talking about. That's what happened in our City on this past week. But as I said again, I've got some wonderful guests who will be here with us on Funky Politics Memphis, Dr. Altha Stewart, Judge Tarik Sugarmon, and also DA, the District Attorney, Steve Mulroy. So don't go anywhere. Stick right there. I'll be right back with more of our show. And we are back with Funky Politics Memphis. As I promised you, I've got the heavy hitters, as Morgan and Morgan says. The heavy hitters, I got them here today. And let me make sure I qualify my statement when I introduce Dr. Altha Stewart, the Senior Associate Dean. I need to make sure I say the Senior Associate Dean. And that's not talking, it's just talking about, hey, she's up there, folks. And also, not only that, but the former national president for the American Psychiatric Association. And we're mighty, mighty proud. And she's Memphis bred, folks. Got her. Doc, thanks you for being here as well today.
Let me just qualify. I'm South Memphis bred.
Oh.
Just to be on the safe side for the people who know me.
Yeah,
I want to represent.
She representing, of course, we got our good friend, Judge Tarik Sugarmon. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon. I'm doing fine. I'm South Memphis bred, too.
Oh, boy. Now, wait.
Walker McDowell.
General Mulroy, now if he tells me he's South Memphis, I'm out of here. General Mulroy, how are you, sir?
Yeah. I'm fine. I'm fine. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, I'll tell you what. I want to make sure that our listeners get an opportunity for you to just give us about a few seconds of kind of what's going on with you right now. Both of you all were just not recently elected, and thankful for that. But I'm gonna start with Dr. Stewart and just kind of give us a little bit of what's going on with you, Doc.
Well, I'm not an elected official, so I'm safe in that respect, I guess. I am at the University of Tennessee. I'm on the faculty, been there 7 years. And as most of your listeners who follow closely Funky Politics know, I'm all about the kids and making sure that we can keep them in their home, in their community, as opposed to out of home and out of community.
Wow. Thanks. Judge Sugarmon, sir.
Yes, I'm Judge Tarik Sugarmon, recently elected to Juvenile Court. I thank Dr. Stewart because she has been consulting me and our staff. In fact, Dr. Stewart, I'm in Murfreesboro. The last time I was here with the Juvenile Judges Conference, you were presenting at that conference. And I appreciate the work that you do. And we certainly need your input as an expert with regard to juveniles and juvenile trauma. Looking forward to making some significant impact on our community by implementing programs that are effective and data-based, and to get our youth turned around and back on the right trail.
D.A. Mulroy. General, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thanks. I'm happy to be here on the Funky Politics podcast. I'm D.A. Steve Mulroy. Like Judge Sugarmon, I was elected just back in August. It's been a busy few months, as you might know. On my very first week on the job, we had the Eliza Fletcher case and then the Ezekiel Kelly case. Most recently, of course, we've had the challenge with the Tyree Nichols tragedy. I feel good about how we've handled it. We worked quickly but thoroughly to get some initial resolution of that matter, with charges being filed prior to the release of the video. There's a number of other initiatives we're working on, including partnering with Judge Sugarmon on the juvenile crime problem, and I look forward to working with him over the next few years.
Well, lady and gentlemen, this program on today, we wanted to focus on exactly what you just started talking about, and that's our youth. Judge, General, and Doc, it seems like, of course, if it bleeds, it leads. We all know that, right? On the evening news and sometimes the morning news, the afternoon news. Are we at a precipice right now in our community where we have become so desensitized to crime and negativity that we are missing something with our youth right now? I mean, help me out with this. Doc, can you help me a little bit here?
Absolutely. Part of the problem, I think, and I'm different than my colleagues who are virtual with us, because they are on the side where something has happened that gets them into whatever the issue is. I'm fortunate in that the work that I do can be upstream of that young man you were talking about who's in trouble, and you're hoping that someone will step up. All of the data shows that if there is a young person who is at risk, and we can get them engaged with someone, some caring, consistent adult presence, we can change the trajectory of their lives. And that's one of the things we can do. We can do that because we know where the at-risk areas are. We know that if you're bullied, if you don't go to school, if you're not performing well in school, if you don't have a stable household, if you've been abused, neglected, or otherwise challenged psychologically at a fundamentally important part of your development, we know what's going to happen. We can predict with certainty you will go off the track. You will get somehow derailed in the development, and that's going to lead you to doing things that bring you either to the attention of the judge or the attention of the district attorney. It's inevitable. All of the data supports that. We have to, the bleed leads narrative, we got to change that narrative. Sure. We call our children. We call these young people juveniles. I can't make the juvenile justice system change. What I can do is encourage everybody up and down the chain to change the language. Every time you say juvenile, what comes to mind?
Sure.
You know the picture.
That's right. That's right.
And when we stop doing that, when we change that narrative, we demonstrate that we're prepared to meet somebody at a different place. That mentoring can come about now because now they can hear it. Many young people who come before the judge or that are part of the group that the district attorney routinely sees coming into their universe, these are young people who've never been called anything good in their life.
Wow. General, what do you have to say about that? I mean, she's laying this thing out here, and we all know. We've got to be more present. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, though, is it too late when they get to you, though?
But I think everything that Dr. Stewart says is right on the money. You know, the whole idea of upstream interventions, early intervention, is really what we need to do. We need to be focusing more on preventing crime. And when young people first start getting caught up in the system, we need to be looking at programs for them, interventions to reduce the repeat offender, the recidivism rate, to divert them the trajectory of their lives so that we're not seeing them over and over again in the system. Now, you asked, is it too late by the time they get to me? I don't think the answer to that is yes. I think that, an enlightened policy would have us working with the under 18 defendants to try to get them into the kind of programming and make that a condition of the plea agreements, sure. so that we can do what we need to do. I know that Judge Sugarmon is very interested in juvenile reentry. I think that's another great idea. Look forward to partnering with him on that. One of the things that we're talking about is taking a look at the people in the dependency and neglect docket, which is part of Judge Sugarman's docket, but it's on the civil side. But because so many of the children in the dependency and neglect docket go on to join the delinquency docket, and then later on they go on to commit serious crimes. If we can start reaching out to those children early on so that they don't end up in the system in the first place, that's the best thing, the most effective thing. But even when they come to us, I still don't think that it's too late. Not for most of them anyway. I mean, I think there may be some children who are, have such a long record of violent crime that, no choice but to transfer them to adult court and deal with them as adults. But I think that should be a last resort, not a first instinct. And so I think the kinds of interventions that I know Judge Sugarman is interested in and that we heard just now from Dr. Stewart are really where we need to put our emphasis.
Mm-hmm. Judge Sugarman, I'd like to toss it to you, sir.
Both of them are absolutely true. Early intervention is very important, and I'm glad you mentioned the opportunity to have mentoring. I'd like to see other organizations like the Divine Nine and church-based organizations get engaged, and I know that the community is behind us. Every place that I go, our brothers and sisters, members of the community are saying, how can we help? One of the things I looked at, I was listening to Chief Davis the other day speaking before the council. She mentioned the fact that around auto thefts, not carjacking, auto thefts, the demographic age is largely 15-year-olds. I'd suggested to D.A. Mulroy in working on this of having a docket that addresses car thefts and And then the 15 and unders, the nonviolent offenses, trying to go ahead and get them through the court system into programs, also working with the victims. We have to keep in mind the victims of these offenses need to be addressed, need to weigh in. Restorative justice requires those principles where you take a youth, you explain to them the consequences of the actions. Don't just affect the household, don't just affect their school, don't just affect their immediate community, it affects the larger community. And those restorative justice principles have the victim's impact and input at the forefront. Now, the docket, if a youth spends time in detention, the longer they spend time in detention, the greater the trauma is to that youth. If we can get them through the system where they have an opportunity to have programs, opportunities to have mentoring, opportunities, I'd love it if we had an 8-hour school, but I'm throwing that out there. I know it's a problem, but had more opportunities toward education and catching up. When we went through the pandemic and kids were not going to school, they lost a significant component of growth. That is the socialization. And when a youth is on an ankle bracelet and they're only going from home to school and back, the longer they stay on that ankle bracelet, that's more trauma, and that's more times they're not socializing with their friends. So the opportunity doc will give us an opportunity to intervene at an early time, get programs and opportunities in place for these youth in the community. If they need mental or behavioral counseling or treatment, we need to make sure that they get that early on, because the quicker we deal with the problem that child is going through, the quicker we have a chance of saving that youth.
So, Doc, I want to make sure I throw this out there because, in my conversations with folks, outside of this office here, people are telling me that they're afraid to go to the grocery store. How are you all holding, and I'm talking about the DA up to the juvenile court, are we holding parents accountable? For this 11-year-old, we don't want to talk about any specific case, but for this 9-year-old that has done something similar, are we holding these parents accountable?
Well, I don't know whether, I think criminal prosecution of the parents is really the best way to get at this. There's some issues about to what extent we want to hold one person criminally responsible for the actions of another when they didn't intend for those actions to take place. But also, there's some real concerns about whether it's counterproductive. If the home is a fragile, vulnerable home to begin with, breaking it up by putting the parents in jail, I don't know whether that's the most effective method. I think there are other interventions that we could do short of actually imprisoning the parents. But that's what the dependency and neglect docket is all about from a civil perspective. If this child is growing up in an environment in which they're not being supervised, and which they are vulnerable to the kinds of influences that would have them out on the streets, violently offending, particularly repeat offenses, then I think it's probably time for there to be an intervention of some kind, maybe up to and including taking them away from those irresponsible parents. I think that's probably what I would think would be the more appropriate intervention than trying to lock up the parents.
Judge,
Yes.
Dr. Stewart? Let me go to Dr. Stewart right quick, Judge, and I'm going to come back to you and let you wrap up on this particular question.
Well, I think when we're talking about youth crime, and you will notice throughout my narrative, I don't call the child a juvenile.
Sure.
It's the juvenile justice system, juvenile law. I can't change a historical fact and a legal fact that is built into law. But when it comes to that child, I can call them a child, a youth, an adolescent, pretty much the same number of syllables that we put that effort into changing that part of the narrative. But I think something that the district attorney said is quite true. What is the risk-benefit analysis of criminal charges against a parent who, by and large, with a few exceptions, is doing the best they can to keep a otherwise fragile family unit in place, whether it's housing that's stable, food on the table, transportation back and forth to their job, childcare when they can get it. Is that really, and I would agree with him 100%, there has to be some weighing of whether or not that's the way to go. My preference, and remember, I'm not law enforcement or
Sure.
legal, I am looking for opportunities to build resilience in family units that allows them to make the decision, we can do better. We can make this work. So I would look at the solution being, let's get family support specialists involved at that point, because now we're talking after the fact. Car theft is a crime. Something has to happen, but we're not just talking about the child. Children operate within a universe of other people. So if it's a parent, caregiver, legal guardian type person, maybe a family support specialist as part of that probation, whatever kind of supervised setting, maybe we include them as part of the team of people who are checking in, checking up, and checking on someone who has stepped across the line legally and needs to have some consequence, but may not need to be taken out of the household. Parents talking to parents about these challenges they face, particularly with young boys.
Yes. Yes.
Single moms talking about the challenges of raising a son is something that every mother we have worked with over 7 years in our programs. And we've got programs for kids who have been recruited into gangs, kids who are at risk for recruiting into gangs, kids who've suffered serious physical and psychological trauma as a result of things that happen in their homes or their neighborhoods. So we've got all range of problems. And these are moms who can talk to each other, share solutions, support each other, remind them to stay strong. When he steps over the line, don't automatically say, that couldn't be my child. Understand that sometimes it is your child.
That's right. Judge Sugarmon, I want to bring it back to you, holding parents accountable.
Well, accountability can take different forms.
Sure.
If a parent has to come to back and forth to court with their child, say for instance on a delinquent matter, that is accountability. Now, also on an opportunity docket where we target the 15-year-olds and those minor offenses, we would have strict following with them over a period of time. Say 6 days out, we contact the school, keep in contact with the family unit, make sure that we are putting services in place and mentors. We'd like to have 2 mentors for each youth that visit back out into the community so that they get constant contact, that constant attention, and then having the parent to check in 2 or 3 times a week. If there are problems, the follow-up will be even greater. That is accountability. But again, locking a parent up, again, to reflect what Dr. Stewart said, is not the answer. You're taking that parent out of the family unit and you're breaking down the family even more. Now, on the DNN docket, as D.A. Mulroy pointed out, that is where we have the greatest opportunity to turn this youth around. I'm in Murfreesboro now at the Juvenile Court Judges Conference, and I spoke to Commissioner Quinn over DCS. We've had problems with our DCS programs. We've been underserviced in Shelby County specifically. Children are actually sleeping in the DCS office who have been placed with DCS. We have this opportunity incentive program, Family Social Services. They were going to cut off Family Social Service for a while because they didn't have the staff to address the family's needs. They look at housing insecurity, food insecurity, whether there's opportunity for job training or increasing the opportunity at taking classes to become employable in a higher skilled labor force. All of those things come through family services. They've assured us that we're not going to lose our family services. They are going to start giving us more DCS caseworkers. And Shelby County, for per capita per child, has more children per caseworker than any other county in the state of Tennessee. We have to, when we talk about accountability, again, hold the parents accountable. I talked to a gentleman at Seedco. This is for young fathers. It teaches them the responsibility of taking care of your family, putting together a budget, giving you opportunities to partner with the mother of your children and learn how to communicate between each other. Communication between parents is something that often is overlooked, but we are looking at building family units, giving them the opportunities and incentivizing positive changes within that family unit.
Well, I'll tell you what, great conversation so far. We've got a lot more we need to talk about. I've got to take a break because I want to come back. I want to stay on this accountability piece because I want to make sure that our listeners understand that we've got a system in place, and every child we can't send every child to prison. They're not going to go to Riverbend or anything. That's just not going to happen. In a civilized society that we live in, it won't happen, right? And we don't want that to happen. But what we do want, I think, is accountability and there to be some type of pushback. I think that's what the citizens are asking for. So just a minute. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more Funky Politics Memphis.
This is a journey.
Let me take you on a journey.
The journey.
Don't you ever think so little of yourself that you let folk treat you any kind of way just so you can stick around.
Watch The Journey on the Kazukia Network.
We're back with more Funky Politics Memphis. My panel of guests, Dr. Altha Stewart, of course, with the University of Tennessee, DA Steve Mulroy, District Attorney here in Shelby County, and our Shelby County Juvenile Court Judge Tarik Sugarmon. And, we were talking here about accountability, talking about some strategies, but I want to go back to this piece because I think it's very, very important. Now, DA Mulroy, I heard you say about the civil docket, handling maybe the parents or the guardians on that side. But when you have citizens that demand an answer and we say, well, have we lost the political will to hold people accountable? I mean, I'm going to throw it out there. I believe you have to hold them accountable. You've got, I had a friend of mine who had some issues with a young person, and she felt like he didn't get the justice that was due him for what he did. And so I'm just asking, are we as a community ready to say it's time for us to, hey, look, we've got programs in place. You're going to go to the program or you're going to participate or you're not. But if you don't, this is the other eventual end to it. D.A. Mulroy?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you've just said. Anybody who violates the law must be held accountable.
Sure.
Now, I think they are held accountable for their own actions. We generally don't hold one person accountable for someone else's actions under the criminal law unless we have some proof that they intended that crime be taken place and they provided assistance to that person, right? That's the whole theory of accomplice liability. So if there is a person under 18 that is committing a criminal act, they need to be held accountable, and there need to be consequences to them for that act. They can't just, be let off without any consequences. Now, those consequences can take many forms. In extreme cases, it can be charging them as an adult. But the data shows that most of the time when we do that, they're actually more likely to reoffend when they come out of the adult prison because we're basically sending them off to crime college. Mm-hmm. So in the non-extreme cases, we try to have some sort of accountability, some sort of consequences that's still in the juvenile court system where there's a broader array of rehabilitative services available, because data shows that if we can get them into programs early on, we have a better chance of lowering that repeat offender rate later on down the line, because whatever we do with them, they're eventually going to come back out onto the street. And the question is, will they come back out to the street having been prepared to do something other than having life on the street, or not, in which case they'll just go back to the only life they know. So definitely accountability, definitely consequences for the person that actually does the crime.
Sure.
And if they're under 18, then we start out with the default assumption that we try to keep them in the juvenile system and get them into some sort of programming. That may involve some detention, either pre-trial or even post-adjudication in a juvenile facility. But hopefully it will also involve some programming as well.
So now with that in mind, truancy, and I think in 2021, and if we skip the pandemic, we know that it's been horrible on our children. We know it's been horrible on adults, right? We know all of that. But when we've come out of it, if truancy is such a huge issue, and I'm looking at statistics that said 40,000 students fiscal year ago, were absent, were chronically truant.
Or not enrolled.
Yeah, or not enrolled in school. And so, Dr. Stewart, how do I get a parent or a guardian to understand that young person is going to be lost if you don't get them prepared to go and get an education? They've got to do. That's the one thing I need you to do.
Part of the challenge for us is having no value for the things that we determine to be important to us.
Wow.
How many of the children who are truant today, whether it's not going to school or never being enrolled in school, come from households where no one valued education? I didn't go to school, and
Sure.
I make a decent living, or I got a side hustle, and it's okay. So we have got to, as a society, begin to figure out, how do I convince people who say they want better for their children to factor into that equation, and that includes education? How do I do that and make it stick? Because either the judge or the district attorney said accountability looks different in different settings.
Sure.
And if I'm holding you accountable for making sure your child is in school, but I don't assure that you have a safe place for them to live, I don't make sure that they don't come to school hungry, I don't make sure that they don't get awakened to gunshots in the neighborhood or have to sleep on the floor to avoid getting shot in the crossfire, then your value for sending him or her to school,
Sure.
that's not really at the top of my list. I know it's important, and I know I could get into trouble, but it's not at the top of my list. So we've got to configure our values as a society in a way that says, yeah, that is important. And then we've got to convince them that going to school will actually make a difference, that your child isn't going to be bullied and we're not going to do anything about it, that your child isn't going to be told by the teacher, oh, well, you didn't pass the test, so you're just stupid. That they're not going to suffer somehow as
Additional
a result
traumas.
of being there,
Yeah.
which is the additional trauma. And that trauma is not an excuse, but an explanation, has got to be understood by everybody. People tell me all the time, well, you're just making excuses for those bad kids. First of all, they're not just bad kids. Second of all, trauma is real. It rears its ugly head later in life for all of the things we don't deal with as children, whether that's illness or substance abuse or domestic violence. Those things track back to early childhood trauma. ACEs, traumatic childhood experiences, whatever label you give it. These are the things that make the difference in that 11-year-old who devalues everything and says, you don't care about me, I don't care about you. Yeah, I'm going to steal your car, I'm going to hit you in the head. And you know what? If I get a gun, I'm going to shoot you.
Wow. Judge Sugarmon, truancy and what you're facing with court now and holding our parents accountable.
When truant cases come to us, it's usually gotten to the point where they're determined to be extreme. Now, we met with Memphis and Shelby County school officials about 2 or 3 weeks, a lot of my staff, to address some concerns with our truancy dockets. They had several parents who had histories of truancy, but it was heartbreaking because a lot of these parents, either they had an illness where they couldn't get to and from school, they were challenged by transportation issues, they had housing insecurity where they were living literally out of cars that didn't run, and they were relying on neighbors or friends to get their children to school. Other issues were, we found that a family was moving. They were displaced, and again, they were challenged with housing, so they were moving from relative to relative or friend to friend, and each move, the child would go to a different school, and the school where they originally registered was reporting them as truant while they were actually in the system. So these are things we have to work out. Now, if it's a situation where the youth are young, let's say under 13, 14 years old, that is clearly an issue where it's parental neglect, educational neglect. In those instances, they will come up or could come up on our defense and neglect docket, educational neglect. And in that instance, the parents are held accountable. They have to come to court. We look at what's going on in the household. If it's substance abuse, they could lose custody of their children. If it's other issues, such as being food or homing insecure, housing insecurity, then we can address that with social services. And the school system can help address that. Now, if it's a situation where we have a teenager 16, 17 years old, it's clear that the teenagers are making a decision not to go to school.
That's right.
We'll address that by holding that youth accountable. There are all kinds of ways where we have to be proactive about this. And again, the pandemic created an opportunity for desocialization. And a lot of these children have to be resocialized. And dealing with it when they're young in that household on the DNN docket will keep those younger children off of our delinquency dockets down the road. We have to make sure the services are in place, the opportunities for rehabilitation with some of these kids are in place. Again, I want to have mentors involved and social services in place to heal these families. You can't just punish the child and put them back in the same environment and expect to get something different.
D.A. Mulroy.
Yes, one of the things I should have mentioned earlier before I moved to truancy is when we were talking about how important it is to provide services early on to children that are involved in the juvenile court system. One of the things that we're doing now, Judge Sugarman, his office and my office, that I think is a change and an improvement, is we're providing those services while they are in pretrial detention itself. We're not waiting until the case is ultimately disposed of to get them those services. And I think that's an important innovation. It's something that we need to be doing more of. Now, with respect to truancy, I don't have a lot to add that hasn't already been said by Dr. Stewart and Judge Sugarman. I tell you that our office under the prior administration had been working with Shelby County Schools on truancy, and the Shelby County Schools discontinued that relationship because, in their view, the way this office had been handling it was too punitive. I'm happy to say that under my administration, we've reestablished that relationship. Both I and members of my staff have been meeting regularly with school officials to try to see what we can do to help them with the truancy problem. We're setting up a series of graduated sanctions. So for the most part, the sanctions are internal to Shelby County Schools. Just as Judge Sugarman said early on, the focus is on figuring out what needs to be done. Is it a transportation issue? Is it a nutrition issue? Is it a health issue on the part of one of the parents? Is there somebody else that can get the kids to school? What are the things that we can do to help them? If the pattern of absenteeism continues, then the sanctions get greater and greater as we go. I will tell you this, though. It is something that I think is important because the data is really clear. When you have a child that is not attending school, they are just so much more likely to start offending in the criminal justice system. In fact, when they do studies about the time of day, at the 3 o'clock point when school lets out, there is this significant spike in crime by those under 18. It's precisely because when they're not around in school, when there's no after-school program for them, there's no one to supervise them, then they're much more likely to get into trouble. So that's the kind of stuff that I want to work on with the school system. But basically, my office's attitude is we're following the lead of the educators. We're asking the school system, what can we do to help? And we're basically taking their lead.
Can I just add one thing?
And I want you to also explain ACEs, because you touched on it. Go ahead.
I just want to say that the panel you have here today is the evidence that I believe everybody in Memphis needs to understand is available and working together already. My university is already in conversation with the DA and his staff around some innovative ways to do what he just said. We have right now, we're working on a collaborative project with the juvenile court around youth reentry, so that for those kids who are out of home placed, that when they return to the community, they're bringing back something that will be different in terms of them, their skill set, their understanding of their role in that community and what they can do differently. These three organizations, the district attorney, the juvenile court, and the University of Tennessee, are already in collaborative conversations around we can work together because our system overlap needs are so great.
Sure.
None of us alone can do this. So I just wanted to point out that you were very, very great to bring this particular group of three together.
It was my producer.
I know.
But I will say this, though, that I did say and she said, we got to do something else. Yeah. And I said, well, we got to get the subject experts. Well, and I don't know who else other than you guys, right? Your producer
is brilliant, because I just wanted to say that, because I think so many times people hear that we don't agree on everything and how it ought to happen, but it doesn't mean that we don't continue to work on these things together. So I want people who are listening to understand there is work being done now in furtherance of changing the way this rolls out. We all believe in mentoring. We all believe in programs before rather than just after something has happened. And everybody today has said something about getting the family involved, working with the school, making sure social and human services are in place. So we're all starting off very well. And each of us has our own particular spin and responsibility, I might add, for our role in this whole problem-solving process. So I just I was
Thank you.
struck
I
by the
appreciate
fact that we are almost finishing each other's
I know
sentences.
you all are on the same page.
Yeah,
I mean, we're singing from the same, but and of course we've needed this for years, right? Well, I won't say.
Well, you can get us to do a regular thing, you
Hey,
know,
well, you know, hey.
maybe. And really lay out some
Take it on the road.
solutions. Yeah, lay out some solutions that citizens here in Memphis will see there really are some things we can do. We've got data at the University of Tennessee around the number of kids that we have worked with in concert with the juvenile court that had family histories of truancy, family histories of detention. I mean, where the case files are like thick. We've done those.
So
reviews.
generation to
Yes,
generation
yes.
to generation.
And just like trauma and wealth, generational behavioral issues that may be an indication of ADHD, PTSD, or any number of other issues, we know where they are.
and we don't just call it a generational curse.
And they're not just bad kids. I want
Yeah.
to just say that
Yes.
several times.
And I want to make sure that ACEs, we talked about ACEs. When I got the judge and I got the DA here, I want to make sure we get that out. What an ACE is so our listeners know exactly.
ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and in the science and healthcare arena, we have determined through lots and lots of study. This is not just Dr. Stewart thinks this stuff. These things have been studied extensively around the world. We now know that in 3 important areas: abuse and neglect, household dysfunction, and actual physical harm and psychological harm, that we can impact children early in their lives with these experiences of domestic violence, somebody in the house who's been incarcerated or mentally ill, people who grow up hearing you're no good, you'll never be any good, your father was no good, your mother was no good, whatever, that these children are impacted, that imprint on their brain literally rewires them such that they behave differently and they respond to things differently. And when we don't take that into account, it's not an excuse, it's an explanation for why an otherwise good kid who has now been through lots and lots of tremendously traumatic experiences makes a bad decision. Kids don't have functioning brains. Any parent will tell you this child is not thinking. And it doesn't matter whether you're a wealthy parent or a poor parent. You can tell a child 5 times to take out the trash, and it's not till the 10th time that it actually makes it out the door.
That's right.
So when I'm standing in front of a group and they say, well, that's for that kind of kid. No, these are kids across the board whose brains are not fully developed. And when these things happen to them, these traumatic experiences, they take that in, their brain and their body remember it, and even without their knowledge, they begin to act out the effects of that. That's adverse childhood experiences, and we can do something about it. We can prevent it and we can mitigate it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. DA Mulroy, before we only have a little bit more time left, but I want to make sure that the listeners, the citizens of Shelby County, know for a fact that they've listened to this program already, and they see that what you all are proposing is hopefully something that'll work, right? But again, I want to make sure that you all know that there is angst out there in our community. And you guys, you live in the community, you know that. There's angst in the community. Certain people are afraid to do this, they don't want to park their car down here. Mm-hmm. How do we reassure our citizens, y'all? And I guess we can say it's just, I don't want to put all of this on the youth, because it's not all youth that are committing all the crimes in our community. We know that, right? But how do we convince our citizens that there are processes in place, and especially by our DA and our juvenile court judge, that if you give us a minute and it'll work, we get some resources behind it, we can turn this thing around. Judge Sugarmon?
Oh, I thought you were going to. Again, getting out in the community. You mentioned ACEs, and I wanted to go back to that. Commissioner Charlie Caswell took me through the ACEs protocol, and it was eye-opening. We have to have a court that magistrates understand the ACEs protocol. We're going to have a trauma expert that'll come in and do the assessments to determine how trauma has affected that youth, so that we build a program for rehabilitation and healing for that youth. Dr. Stewart hit the nail on the head. These children, and I said this years ago, are growing up in communities like war zones. The traumatic effect of hearing gunshots in your neighborhood on a regular basis, in school having to be facing situations of being bullied and teased at an age where you're very emotionally insecure. And then in the household where there is maybe substance abuse, maybe other issues such as domestic violence, these children are seeing this on a daily basis. How do you expect a child to have any security about the love that they're getting from their parents when they see how they treat each other? Those are the kind of things we have to address. We need to look at the ACEs protocol. And then you mentioned about the community. I regret Brother Caswell had a crime forum this past weekend. He said he'd forgotten to give me the notice on it. But in any event, they have several of them going around to various commission districts. We have to get out in the community and explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, the data that supports the direction we want to take this court. And that way the community have the buy-in. And again, we have to keep the victims involved in this. Yes. So many people have been injured. I tell people, nobody's immune. Yes. I'm not immune. My family has not been immune from this violence. It's not a pandemic yet, but it is a problem. The crime statistics overall are going down, but the violent crime is what drives the news. As you said, Brother Catron, when it bleeds, it leads. Yeah. We have to make sure that we engage the community and keep them abreast of what's going on by delivering the message. Now, I want to say one other thing before I close. I want to thank you and the staff there at Kazukia. With what has been transpiring the past few months, people always wanted to have answers from the juvenile court. Judges cannot talk about the cases that are pending before them or that may come before them. We cannot, especially with juveniles, we can't give out any information, whether it's on the social side with DNNs or whether it's on the delinquency side. What we can do is talk about the internal programs, and reporters will ask me questions and say, well, submit me some, and I'll be glad to address what we're going to do, what we're planning to do, we have in place, and changes we've already made to try to close this gap. But we can't answer questions. You don't see criminal court judges getting on the evening news talking about the cases that they're handling. So I thank you and your staff for respecting the fact that there's a lot that I can't talk about, but there's a whole lot about what we're doing that I want to talk about.
Well, Judge, I wanted to make sure that I threw that caveat out there. A lot of people don't know. They think, oh, a judge can tell you. No. If you want something thrown out really quickly, get a judge to start talking about a case. D.A. Mulroy, he's another one. I mean, that's why I wanted to talk in terms of generalities, nothing in particular that we can put our finger on. And D.A. Mulroy, let you take a swat at this thing.
Yeah, and I also want to thank you for having us on, and I appreciate the discussion that we've had here. You mentioned before about the concern of the community. It's absolutely real. Yeah. I'm familiar with it. I'm hearing from it from all different quarters, all different places around Shelby County. People are afraid to go out and pump gas. Yeah. Car thefts are through the roof, carjackings, things like that. I just met today with a large group of very influential business leaders who say they're really concerned because they're hearing people talking about, do we need to move? They're having trouble getting investment to come in from outside. They're having trouble to recruit. So this is a serious problem. It can't be discounted. Now, this problem didn't develop overnight. Violent crime has been rising steadily every year over the last decade. Now, during that decade, we did the tough on crime thing. We did the stick only, no carrot approach, lock people up for longer and longer and longer, and it manifestly didn't work. So we need to try other approaches. But it is definitely the case that right now we've had some real serious issues, and we need to get serious about it. And you mentioned before that it's not just crimes, so-called juvenile crime, and you're right. The majority of violent crime is committed by people who are over 18. Now, there has been a rise in the last year or two in crime by those under 18, and we need to address that. And some of the things you heard the three of us talking about tonight can help with that. But is there hope? Yes, there's hope. I think people need to understand that the mere fact that all of us are acknowledging the severity of the problem is a sign that we're going to roll up our sleeves and do what we can about it. And, I look forward to partnering not only with Judge Sugarmon in juvenile court, but with Dr. Stewart and, the University of Tennessee, all the universities, the business community, they're stepping up. We're all going to be working on this together. For the first time in a while now, we've got a DA, juvenile court judge, a county mayor that are all on the same wavelength. I'm working cooperatively with law enforcement to do what we can. The only way that we're going to lick this, and it's not going to be licked overnight, but the only way we're going to lick it is if we all work together. And one of the signs for hope is that we are all working together right now because we all understand the gravity of the problem. And just the last thing I'll say is that there's a term in the science called return to the mean, that when you have outliers, eventually things go back down to the normal baseline. What goes up must come down. We've been experiencing a real spike in crime for a long time. It's not going to turn around overnight, but it will get better. We're gonna see to that.
I like to hear that, Judge. Dr. Stewart, it will get better.
Yes,
you're a psychiatrist. Will you tell me it's going to get better?
Keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive.
It will get better.
Wow.
And I would join my colleagues in thanking Kadzukian and you and your production team for having this conversation. I think it's important. Yeah. And I think, again, I will say what the gentlemen have already said. It is possible for us to come up with solutions that will work for us and the people that we serve. It is possible.
I like to hear that.
And can I just add one other thing real quick? I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this. Very often we have these discussions, people ask, what can we do? What can the community do? Because the community is concerned, what can they do to help? And there is a lot that they can do to help. I would mention at least two things off the bat. One of them is to cooperate with law enforcement. We need to trust the system and cooperate with law enforcement. That means providing tips. It means reporting crimes. It means agreeing to serve as witnesses. Only with that kind of community cooperation can law enforcement and the DA's office bend the curve on crime, particularly violent crime. And the other thing is something you all have mentioned several times, which is mentoring youth. Each one of us can take one person and change the trajectory of their lives, and we all need to pitch in together to do it.
Yeah. Wow. And because he reminded me, the other one thing that everybody can do is learn something about the stuff we've been talking about. Learn what trauma is in the life of a young person. Learn where you can be that one adult in their life that is consistent, caring, and unconditionally involved.
Wow. I like that. You know what, folks? We've had a wonderful time with you all. Dr. Altha Stewart, Judge Tarik Sugarmon, and DA Steve Mulroy. Thank you all so much for joining us here on Funky Politics Memphis. Need to get you back sometime soon. I hope you'll agree to do that. Come on back sometime soon. Hopefully when there's a lot more better news to talk about. But even the work that you're doing in your respective silos right now, because it seems like it's a community of ideas. And so those community of ideas is going to get us over the top. It's going to get us where I think we want to be, okay? Thank you all so much. I'll be right back with thank you, sir. Some closing thoughts on what would DC do.
Check out all your Kadzukian favorites now.
Whoa. What a show. Right here on Funky Politics Memphis. You heard it first. I told you guys we do it real live. We do it real funky here. Dr. Altha Stewart with the University of Tennessee. Judge Tarik Sugarmon, the juvenile court judge, and DA Steve Mulroy. Learn something new. He don't like to be called a general. He likes to be called DA. So we'll call him DA Mulroy. We tried to lay out the case that there is a significant issue in our community that is affecting us. And it looks like a good number of our youth are out there violating. But you know what? They're not. Talking to the judge and talking to DA Mulroy and talking to Dr. Stewart, I was going to tell you what would DC do. Today I was going to say, let's rebuild tall trees. Let's build prisons. Let's stick all them bad kids there. But now you know what? What I want us to do, I want us to redouble our efforts. Redouble your efforts. Mentor. I know it's tough, but you got to give more than 2 or 3 hours a month. These children need real mentors, people that are not afraid to hug them, people that are not afraid to tell them that you love them, people that are not afraid to invest in these young people. They've got to get a fighting chance. If they're not getting that chance at home, it's us, folks. We got to do it. We got to do it. So I'm going to redouble my efforts. This is what I would do. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to redouble my efforts. I am going to mentor another young male here starting on March 1. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make sure that he has my phone number. He knows how to get in contact with me. But most of all, I'm going to make sure that he knows there's somebody in his corner. That's what DC would do. Make sure these young folks know that you're in their corner. You know what, folks? Thank you for being with us here today on Funky Politics Memphis. Man, I had one hell of a show today, and it was funky up in here, funky hot too. We'll see you again here next time. We're out of here. Bye.